You're watching Rogers TV. The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers Cable or Rogers TV.
Hello, NB Polypod world. Welcome back to another week. I'm here with my intrepid co-host, Joanna Killen.
Hello, everybody.
And as always, we are here in Mennequest or St. John, New Brunswick, on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoq, and the Pescatawamacati. Where it's dreary out there. It's been rainy. It's been dark, and so our cameras, if you were watching us, also look a little bit dimmer than normal. But it's one of those things where it's like it's light enough out there that you guys can see us, but if I put a spotlight on my face, my bald head is going to just blind everybody. So yeah, sorry if we're a little dim this week. And we've got a great episode this week. We sort of teased it out last week, with our conversation with Jerry Wanis.
Yes.
And it's something we've alluded to in the past, Joe.
Yeah, so we've talked about this probably more than alluded to, I'd say. It's explicitly declared as what we've believed to be necessary, both federally and provincially, which is electoral reform and proportional representation. So we have an amazing guest here who served as a former board member of Fair Vote Canada, current volunteer. And we're going to get into this topic because, two-party systems, we are feeling heavily frustrated with them after this election and believe, there's got to be a better way. So
there does. Yeah, we're going to bring Vivian Unger in and talk to us with it. But just so folks are aware, Vivian was the one, you might remember this, back at the the New Brunswick Liberal Association convention. Vivian brought the resolution to that convention, the biannual, for a citizen assembly on electoral reform. So we're going to bring Vivian right now to have a say with us here. Welcome to the podcast, Vivian.
Thank you, Brent. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Give us a little bit about you. I mean, you mentioned in the email that we started off, you heard us kind of make reference to some electoral reform when we were talking with Sean. You've written us before. You've chimed in on the pod, but you've been involved with Fair Vote Canada since 2012. I believe you said that's a long time to be in the fight for electoral reform. And so I guess we got to know why you got into it, what you were up to along the when you first got started, and then what was that journey like? From volunteer to board member, and even if you can give the audience a bit of a primer on Fair Vote Canada. I have been a donor to Fair Vote Canada and a spreader of their good propaganda on many occasions. So I'd love to hear that story.
Okay, well, I guess it's kind of, in a way, it started with Harper's majority government, although I could go farther back than that. But he was constrained by a minority government for a while, and he kept trying to get a majority, kept calling the early elections, and then he finally got the majority, and then he was just like this bull in a china shop wrecking everything. And I guess that was the point where I said I've just about had it. And so I joined Fair Vote Canada and started volunteering, started passing around petitions, whatever they wanted me to do. And I ran for the board. I think the first time maybe was in 2017 and I didn't get in. And then I ran again I might be getting the dates wrong, but I had to run twice. And the second time I got in and I was on the board for 2 years.
Okay.
And
wow. You were a volunteer and then you became a board member. You didn't come on as a board member. Gotcha.
Yeah. And then the terms are 3 years long. I had some difficulties with certain board members, and I actually ended up just serving 2 years. So, and then I resigned. But I remained with Fair Vote Canada, and I kept volunteering. And, we've had some disappointments, like Trudeau at the federal level just deciding, no, I don't want to keep the promise. And,
Did you happen to see his interview with Nate Erskine Smith?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I
Well,
did.
apparently it's his biggest regret.
Yeah, it's his biggest regret, but notice what part he regrets. He doesn't regret that he didn't put proportional representation, which is what everybody wanted, what they were recommending, just about every expert they talked to, that's what they recommended. He's not regretting that he didn't put in proportional representation. His big regret was that when he had the majority government, he didn't ram through what he wanted, which was not proportional representation. It was what he calls ranked ballots, like winner take all ranked ballots, which wouldn't change things that much.
Yeah.
So
It's like you can kind of see it maybe that it's an improvement, but it's also, what are we trying to do here? So let's back up the train a little bit. We have a first past the post electoral system. Everybody's familiar with that, because if you've ever been somebody that's voted for the non-winning party and you saw the winning party have less than 50% of the vote, which they almost always do, you think to yourself, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. More of us pick the other guys, or a mixture of the other folks running. And then if you go a step further, you study political science, you realize, oh, wait a minute, there's actually like 19 different voting styles that we could choose from. Everything from, like you said, ranked ballot, right up to like a mixed member representative proportion MMRP system, to there's 2 or 3 variations that BC tried to pass, and actually 50% of British Columbians did vote for electoral reform, but it didn't pass their 60%, was it?
That's right,
quota.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it was like, the majority wanted a new voting system, but they didn't get the threshold. So it failed in British Columbia when they had a vote for it there, much to the disappointment of everybody. But like, what is it that you specifically have been advocating for, and where is it that Fair Vote Canada finds itself in that conversation?
What Fair Vote Canada has been talking about since I joined is just, we want some element of proportionality. We're not too fussed about which system it is. And by the way, there are systems, you can do a proportional system with a ranked ballot, which, Elizabeth May even made that point to Trudeau. She said, we know you want a ranked ballot. Well, you can do single transferable vote, like
Right.
they have in Ireland. And she wrote him a letter. I doubt anything he responded or anything, because that's not what he wants. So we just want we want some proportionality. And then recently, we've been looking at what goes on with the referendums. Like you said, British Columbia, I think the vote, they got about 57% voting yes, but it didn't pass the 60% threshold. And then also in PEI, there were a couple, first there was a plebiscite. Actually, I think they might have had 3, but I remember anyway, they had a plebiscite where they had to rank the different systems, and first past the post was one of the systems that they ranked. But mixed member proportional was the system that won, but then the guy who was in charge at the time, the Liberal premier, he just said, oh, not enough people voted on this, so I'm just not going to put it through. And so apparently Islanders were pretty mad at him. He didn't expect them to get mad at him, and that might have something to do with the fact that the Liberal Party in PEI has never recovered. But then they
it's almost non-existent.
Yeah, and I kind of think they deserved it, especially with what happened last time. Is it Sharon Crawford or something like that? She was the new leader, and then she ran against the leader
Peter
of
Bevan
the Green
Baker.
Party.
Yeah.
Even though she didn't live in his riding, she was just like, I'm going to show him that only the Liberals and the Conservatives have the right to exist or something. It was like she got beaten, and she deserved it.
Yeah. The Greens got diminished, but they still held on to their official party status, and they were the official opposition, and they got a lot of legislation passed for an opposition party, which was cool to see. But electoral reform isn't one of them. Is there any Yeah, I mean, you personally, is there, I get the Fair Vote Canada doesn't have a system, but is there a system that you lean towards that you've kind of done some work in or on?
I kind of like a single transferable vote because it doesn't discriminate against independent candidates.
Hmm.
So that's a ranked ballot, but you elect more than one representative per district. So
Yeah,
yeah, like
walk us through
Yeah.
that because
Hmm.
I'm familiar with MMRP more than I am single transferable vote. And if one from depending on the style, but in an MMRP system, which I know there's variations on that, but the one I'm familiar with would be Germany, where there are those direct candidates. Whoever wins that vote um, gets whoever wins the most percentage of the vote from whatever party, they get a seat, and then there are alternate candidates that parties put up, and they have the parties have their own sort of system to say here are our alternate candidates if we have to appoint candidates. So if the NDP or a version of the NDP, let's say in Canada, got 20% of the vote, well, they would get 20% of the seats, but it would be through potentially alternate. If they got 20% of the seats based on actually winning ridings, well, then that would be fine too. They'd get those, and none of their alternates would get appointed. But if yeah, so in a sense, you'd have the right percentage of seats based on the percentage of vote for each party. But yeah, if that single transferable vote, can you describe how that interacts?
yeah, so you have a ranked ballot. People rank their first, second, third preferences, etc. And then first they count the first choice votes. So it's done in rounds. And the person who gets the least amount of votes gets dropped. And then they go to second choices. And you keep doing that until you've filled all the seats. So with every round, hopefully there's someone who got over the quota, because there would be a quota depending on how many seats you're filling. And so you just keep people get over the quota, they get a seat. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but if you get
This is great.
Oh yeah,
over the quota,
we love the weeds.
you like the weeds. I can see that. Yeah, if the person who won the seat gets anything over the quota really is transferred to the other candidates who haven't had a seat yet. So there are two transfers. You'd think they'd call it double transferable vote, but for some reason it's single transferable vote. Yeah, the person who gets dropped, their choices their ballots are transferred, and the votes that are over the quota, they're also transferred. So you just keep doing that until all the seats are filled. I hope that wasn't too complicated.
Yeah, it's it's a completely different system, and that makes sense to me, right? Like it has some elements of ranked voting and some elements of MMRP, and the outcome though, and this is where I want to pivot if we can. Why do you think Canada needs a proportional style system? And we want to start with you, but then maybe we can go around the clock, around the circle here, and just kind of give our own thoughts. Because I know, Joe, this was one of your reasons you've talked about on the pod before for voting for Justin Trudeau. When you did, similar to what you said, Vivian. So let's go there. Like, what is it that this fixes, and what do we think the implications of getting or replacing the first past the post system with some sort of proportional?
Okay, so people not getting a voice in Parliament, their vote not really being reflected in Parliament, and this is at the federal level and at the New Brunswick level. I think New Brunswick let's also talk about how New Brunswick needs electoral reform. We can get some very distorted results in New
Absolutely.
Brunswick.
Absolutely.
You probably remember McKenna's clean sweep. He won all the seats.
Yep.
And then Higgs, Blaine Higgs, his first government was a wrong winner type of thing. The PCs won fewer votes. They got more seats than the Liberals. So we're supposed to be, elections should really be about the people choosing who they want in government and what they want that government to look like. And it doesn't end up being that way. And it has effects on everything. It has effects on governance. We don't get as good governance because of the false majority governments. Parties getting the majority governments that they haven't earned, and then they don't have to work with other parties. They don't have to cooperate. And over time, you get more polarization. You get a nastier atmosphere, because when you have a winner-take-all system, it actually benefits one party to attack the other party. Like we see that with what Pierre Poilievre is doing in the, and Justin Trudeau is not perfect either. Justin Trudeau has done a lot of, he's been pretty divisive too, frankly. So you just get that back and forth of punching at each other. It's unattractive, and it doesn't lead to great governance. Only two parties get to hold power, basically. They just kind of flip back and forth. High debt. I wanted to bring this up because, New Brunswick has high levels of debt, and this is connected. There are probably lots of reasons for it, but it's also connected to the electoral system, because it's just so wasteful. Because, one party gets in, they have all the power, they do whatever they want, they don't have to take input from the other parties. After a while, they get kicked out. The other party comes in with all the power, and then they undo what the previous government did, and they go back and forth like that, and it's expensive. In fact, Fairco Canada has done some research. They've looked into studies the political scientists have done, and they found that, or there was a political scientist who found that countries with proportional representation have, I think it was something like 67% less debt.
Wow.
Than countries with systems like ours. Yeah. So there are lots of good to change the system. And
so you mean to tell me that not having, fiscal conservative parties ready in the ranks to come in and form government doesn't make for better debt ratios?
Somehow not. I mean, look how much bribery the conservative parties do. They're supposed to be the fiscally responsible ones, and then it's like, ooh, an election comes up, I'm going to cut everybody a $230 check.
Right.
Now
well, I just want to
doing that. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, just even in on because I worked in economic development, and our partners went from being Business New Brunswick to Invest New Brunswick to Opportunities New Brunswick. And every single time was a whole new marketing strategy, a whole new, set of employees, a new CEO, a new logo. Like, it's just, when you start to think about that, that was just 10 years of it. And I know there was other names of the Economic Development Agency that they've perpetuated before that. So it's like I take that point so closely, because it's right down to the sign on the door that has to get replaced.
Yeah,
over and over again.
And actually, we saw that with the premier, like unveiling the new logo on like Susan Holt's logo on the door, and it's like, because I think it was the French version, has a gendered language. I got to go back and look at her notes, but like, it was exactly that. It was revealing the new plaque and the new logo on the office glass or whatever. It's something I've never thought of, is this idea that, but it makes total sense. If you have to build a coalition of people to stand up an organization with a mandate within government to do a job and get something done, then you have more skin in the game to fight for what you made. And if a party just gets loses their majority status. And I think that's the other thing. Proportional systems tend to lead to less majority situations.
Yeah, if you want a majority in a proportional system, you actually have to win more than half the votes. Just imagine.
Imagine
Oh
that.
my gosh.
Yeah, imagine that.
So okay, so that's good. So the high points there are governance. The high points there are debt. The high points there are people having a sense of agency. Joe, I'll go to you next. Like, this is something we've talked about. What do you think's at stake here? And then we're gonna end up. I'll give my little piece at stake, and then we're gonna go over to your actual effort, Vivian, to get a citizens assembly resolution on the biennial for the New Brunswick Liberal Association. But yeah, go ahead. We'll start with
I think it is that representation of people that is entirely lacking in the current system, because I really don't think we are a binary group of human beings in this province. And when you say are you red or are you blue, like, you're asking people to choose two very specific groups of people, and that leaves out a whole host of others. And I think it what leads to people not being engaged in even voting at all. And so the lack of excitement, urgency, most people, when you go door to door, are like, no, it doesn't really matter. My vote doesn't matter. So that speaks to the lack of agency piece. And I always go back to, I lived in Denmark, and there was just a slew of different parties there. And it's well represented in this Netflix show, Borgen, where the prime minister is a centrist, and she's basically forced to work with all the parties, right? And it's a hell of a job for her. And I'm sure it's, it's over dramatized and whatever, but ultimately that spirit of having to work across party lines is well represented in these countries. And I think that it speaks to the true representation. I'm not offended that there's conservatives in New Brunswick. I'm glad that they exist. I'm glad that they have, they're well represented, but it doesn't mean that I want them to be the only voice in the room, or the Liberals to be the only voice in the room. It's not fair to the lion's share of New Brunswickers who either don't vote or aren't represented by those two parties. So that is my rant.
Okay, well, my turn. Let's crack some knuckles here. You gave voice to it already, Vivian, but this idea that we do not have a proper assembly in Fredericton, the fact that the Conservatives have a fairly close proportion to what they won to what they got for popular vote. The Liberals, however, are quite a bit inflated. They wouldn't have majority status, I do not believe, under the current, if we had a system that held them to that proportion of vote, because they got less than 50% of the vote. The Greens are the big losers, and the third parties, of course, are the big losers, because the Greens got 7% of the seats with 14% of the vote. So you'd be looking at a hard split there, right? How do you give 0.5 percentage of the seats to the NDP or whatever? But or whatever they got. But no, they got, what did they get? I got to look it up again. But either way, you get what I'm saying, that there is a mismatch here. And I think what this does, because we just went through it personally, Joe, we are two people who have a political appetite, a political agenda, political leanings, belief system, and the will to fight for it, the will to get involved and make a change. Vivian, same with you, with your issues, right? We are people who have some knowledge, we have some insight, we have a perspective, but more than that, we also want to get in the game. Your position to serve on a board, admirable. Anybody who serves on a board of any kind, right? It might only take you an hour a month, but this, our solutions and change-making culture doesn't go forward without boards, without communities of people driving them in a direction. And even if it's just checking the box of meeting minutes, that can mean all the difference. So that is something that matters. And when people like us who are fighting for those third parties or those issues, when we're consistently met with loss after loss, despite, good arguments and good reasoning, I think it pushes us to the fringe. And I think that's where we're at as a bit of a society here. We have a lot of people that, like you said, Joe, my vote doesn't matter. And that has been hit home to them over and over again, to the point where they're like, well, frig the government then. I'm going to go and I'm going to invade my own capital, and I'm going to park a truck on the lawn of Justin Trudeau, and I'm going to try to take a shotgun into his house. And like, I continue to say it. People accuse me of being alarmist, but I think you can safely say, if you radically change the voting system, at least for a generation, it interrupts that trajectory, right? Maybe we don't fix all the underlying problems with proportional representation, but you at least communicate to people that those who have shared power and had power are no longer the only cats in the game. And they lost something. They lost power to people's effort. And that, I think, is a big piece of what's at stake. And I think we could gain that with proportional representation. But,
yeah, I think that's a great point, Brent, that if you silence people's voices in your legislatures and in your parliaments, you're going to get people's voices in the streets. And that's what we saw with the trucker convoy. Yeah. And I just like to, we were talking about minority versus majority governments before, and I just want to go back to Hicks having a minority. I know a lot of people weren't happy with the government even then, but I would say it worked better when he had this alliance with the PANB. His worst tendencies were reined in. He had to cooperate, and we got maybe not perfect governance, but we got better governance. And then he got his majority. He called the early election. He got his majority, and look what happened. I think Higgs is a great cautionary tale that politicians should be paying good attention to. He didn't even keep his seat.
Yeah.
He just
And that's a good point, right? Like, politicians love to talk about a mandate. When did the people no longer support the mandate they gave Higgs? I think you're right. As soon as 6 MLAs quit his party or cabinet, I think that's when and that would have been the summer of 23, right on the tail of like pretty substantial like reforms around our regional health authorities, around our district education councils, around policy 713, like all of those pieces were all with, and then even down the list, something that Joe and I have talked about a lot on here, municipal reform, that kind of came, that there was a big middle finger to that in February, and it led. And, by the time you get to July, all of a sudden there's this vote in the ledge, and there's 6 MLAs who, are voting against the party or not present. And it's like, okay. And I think that's when New Brunswickers are like, hey, bud, the direction you're going in ain't it. And then it took a year before we got to an election to be able to prove it, right? But you're right. They lost pretty substantially that way.
But he was so much more tenable when he had checks and balances because of his minority. And even now, like with Justin Trudeau, he's a lot more tenable than he was with the majority, which he didn't win. He was not rewarded for having a majority.
Agreed. Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, he's with the NDP. The NDP have pushed them to do some good stuff that they would not have done if not for the minority government.
Right.
Like, because what they like to do, what the federal liberals like to do, is dangle the promise. You want this? Oh, whoops, and then they take it away. It's like, Lucy with the football for Charlie Brown.
That's right.
Exactly. And it's like, it's 2015. Like, what did you call them? What did you call it, Brad? The Sunny Ways year for Trudeau, where it's like, yes, half the women are in leadership roles, and we're gonna get PR and all this, like and then it just like eroded away completely. And it just to me, it left me feeling like foul about the federal liberals, and I'm scared for this. I'm scared for this provincial example though too. Like, is Susan going to erode these situations away for us as well, that have, like, there's been big promises made and she was rewarded with this majority. And I'm just like, I'm holding bated breath with it, because, you know, here in St. John, we're dealing, and as around the province, dealing with like significant homelessness and significant healthcare challenges, and like tax reform was our talk last week, and that's a 5-year, you know, fix at least, if not more. So it's like, okay, how is this going to be managed, and managed not in a liberal, historically liberal way?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
There's. I was just going to say there's a danger in her having this big majority, and because power is corrupting. And I read an interesting book about that, the power paradox, it was called. And she's just going to have to somehow manage to stay grounded and not, you know, not get a big head. What the book said was, you need to think about other people and what's good for them. Don't just think about yourself, because that's what tends to happen with people in power. They tend to get more focused on themselves and what do I want, and aren't I great, and aren't I special? So.
Like, I love that council, like city council is 10 very different people, and a mayor who's trying to like manage the cats or whatever. I'm sure she'd call it that.
Yeah.
But we all have to, depending on the issue, we all have to put our heads together and decide, you know, how's this going to go, and openly debate in front of everybody about it. So I don't feel that same like accountability and transparency in those the other two levels of government. It's not the same at all.
But you have heard it around the horseshoe that, you know, we all need to be singing from the same song sheet, counselor. We all need to be rowing in the same direction to make this boat go. And it's like, do you guys remember what happened when you just lost sight of the icebergs? Like, oh, by the way, the Titanic sank because you didn't have anybody like on alert that was trying to raise the alarm about impending doom. And it's like those analogies all go out the window real quick when you think of real life, right? It's nice to have somebody who comes along and gives you tough love, or in a good way, in a constructive way. It's nice to have somebody who, you know, really cares about you and is trying to stop you from making big mistakes. They're important people, and it's no different from a party level. So this is exactly where I was hoping the conversation would go, because I think we're at a point where something pretty amazing could happen, and it's going to start with, I said I wanted to go to your biennial motion next, so let's do that. Vivian, describe to us how that happened, but after that I'd love to go to this place where we can talk a little bit more about not just what's at stake, but what or what might be we gain, but what is the pathway for improving our democratic institutions, because that's what this is about. And there are other ways to improve our democratic institutions besides proportional representation, but I think we would all agree that that's the big one. So yeah, start us there at the biennial, your motion, how it did, and what's next.
Okay, well, yeah, it actually starts when I joined the Liberal Party, because I used to be in the Green Party, and then when Vickers resigned, I saw an opportunity. I thought, I want to get in there and make sure that we vote for someone who's actually for proportional representation. And Susan, I talked to Susan Holt when she was running against David Kuhn. She ran in my riding once. She lost to David Kuhn, of course, but yeah, she was very positive about proportional representation, and I wanted to make sure she won, and she did. So that was awesome. So then when it came time for the biennial, she knew that I was interested in electoral reform, and so she put me in a working group with 3 other people who she knew were also interested. It included Jason Alcorn. I think he's a professor at the University of Moncton, and he was also on that commission that Brian Gallant did about electoral reform. And there were a couple of other people there. And so we wrote the resolution, and I got help from a couple of people, a couple of Fair Vote Canada volunteers, and we got that written. Had a bit of a scary time when I discovered that the working group couldn't sponsor its own resolution. And this guy was at the party was telling me he was going to get another, like you had to get a commission, or you had to get your riding association to sponsor it. So, and I thought, I got to do something. I can't just wait and see if he gets this. They had this deadline that was coming in a week. I started running around looking for people to sponsor. Anyway, we ended up with 3 groups sponsoring it. So we were the only resolution that had 3 groups sponsoring it. And afterwards, I noticed some of these other working groups, like the environmental working group, they sponsored their own resolutions. So I never understood, how come they got to sponsor their own resolutions and the electoral reform group didn't? But anyway, so we got to...
That's some strange party apparatus stuff. And I think it's good for our listeners to know this, as you know, somebody who's been on the inside of the party apparatus at 2 levels. One, when I was a young liberal, which, don't make any mistakes about it, the Young Liberal Association of Canada is a federal organization that is adjacent to the federal party, but it is not directly the party. It has representation at the national level, but it has its own sort of structure and has its own rules. And then so you take that example, and then, as you say, Vivian, the New Brunswick Liberal Party has its own party apparatus, bylaws, and rules about how you bring motions or how you bring resolutions and things like that. So what you're describing is interesting. This idea that in some cases it has to be an endorsed resolution, and in other cases it can just be put on the table for a vote.
Well, they could endorse their own resolutions.
Right. That is strange.
Environmental Working Group resolution was sponsored by the Environmental Working Group. And I think the same thing with the Women's Commission. They sponsored their own resolutions. And I didn't understand why the working group couldn't sponsor our own resolution. But then we got there and to the convention, and they had an interesting system worked out, because we were concerned because there were so many resolutions, and I was being told, oh, you got to make sure yours is fast-tracked, otherwise it might not get voted on. So, and I didn't know how to do that. But it turned out they were doing it a different way. They were going to take all the resolutions were going to be voted on. And what we did was we got these stickers. Everybody was given a bunch of stickers. And if you had a problem with a resolution, you wanted it debated, you'd put a sticker on it. And I said there was a certain number of stickers. If a resolution was under that number of stickers, then it got put together in a package with a bunch of resolutions, and they all got voted on at once, and the other ones had to be debated. So my resolution on a citizens' assembly on electoral reform, it got lots of stickers on it. So
lots of debate.
Yeah, we had a debate. Yeah, and but in the end,
who led that debate? How did that debate go? I'm fascinated.
Well, I got up and made a speech. I had a mover's speech, and I had a seconder. It was actually the person who seconded it was the one who was also elected VP of policy in that convention. So she made a speech about why she was seconding it. And then they heard from somebody who said that we mustn't have proportional representation. It leads to extremism. And
this is something I was wondering when this is going to happen, because Joanna, your dad says this. Carl says this.
Yeah, they have to find some reason why we can't have good things, right? So we got to make up something. Why can't we have good things? Ooh, I know. It lets the extremist parties come in and take over government. To which I would say, for one thing, do you like it better when the extremist parties take over, when the extremists take over your big parties? Because we see that in the United States. I mean, Donald Trump is now completely in charge of the Republican Party. They are all his servants. They do what he says, or they suffer the consequences. And
that way.
if they had proportional representation in the United States, Trump would be in charge of his own little party and they'd get some votes. Maybe they'd get, I don't know, let's say they got a quarter of the seats in the House of Representatives. They'd certainly have a voice, but they wouldn't get to decide everything.
But Jill Stein would do a
Yeah.
lot better, and some of the independents would do a lot
that's
better.
right. Yeah,
Because it's very stark there how many people's votes don't matter at all. Like,
Well, yeah, because they have
there's hundreds.
an enforced two-party system. They've got all these means of keeping other parties off the ballot. They just, yeah, it's bad. It's very unjust. Their system is very unjust. And
But
then also,
yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, I love that point though, that like the extremists actually do way more damage when they become the center of these singular parties.
They love. I've heard this argument before, and I don't want to lose track of this conversation that's happening at the biannual. But like I've heard this described before, because like, well, do you want the extremist party like they have in Israel, or do you want the extremist party like the neo-Nazi party that has a premier in charge in Italy? And do you want the ADF from Germany, which is basically Hitler's party that has been reborn in Germany? It's like, okay, wait a minute. First off, those people exist. The people who believe those things organized and deliberately did work to get a message to the table. I want that message to be reflective of the people around. And it's like, the cynicism is hard to fight, because you hear people say, well, and this is another one, Joe, that you've heard before, but imagine how smart the average person is. Well, half the people are dumber than that. And so who are they going to vote for? And look what happened with Donald Trump. But I think when you open up options for people and you level the playing field, it actually minimizes how much, because in the Israel, like the Likud party under Benjamin Netanyahu has had an incredibly difficult time holding on to power. He's lost once. He had to come back. Yeah, they're in a mess, but you look at the parliamentary system in Israel, and there are Arab members of parliament. There are Palestinian members of parliament. There are Jewish settlers that believe crazy stuff in their parliament. Yeah, but then there's a bunch of centrists and sort of left-leaning people. And so I wonder, like, how did that conversation go for you, Vivian, when people were raising this sort of suspicion and conspiracy that proportional representation was going to make the population more extremist?
I actually did not try and challenge that, because the thing is, the resolution was not specifically for proportional representation. The resolution was for a citizens' assembly on electoral reform. So I pointed that out. It's like, this is not about a particular system. This is about giving citizens a voice to decide what system is best for New Brunswick. Yeah.
Wow. So you had to, did you intentionally dial it back to that wording, like to make that more palatable?
Yeah, I guess I did, because there are a lot of liberals who like the idea of the winner take all ranked ballot just because Trudeau likes it. So they think, okay, Justin Trudeau is our leader. He wants this system. That must be the right system. I'm a liberal. I got to want it too. So no, I didn't want to, it being a liberal convention, I didn't want to tell them something that was going to make them not want to vote for it. Like,
but
the Citizens Assembly is.
That's wise. I mean, you read the audience, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell us more. So what happened after that?
So,
popcorn.
I got some applause. I mean, the guy who said that PR brings in extremists, he got a bunch of applause from a table full of old guys at the back. And I got some applause at the front.
Good.
And then we had a vote, and it was a bit close, and I was a bit nervous, but it passed. I think it was 80 something for and 60 something. 50 something against. It's been too long. I don't remember the exact number, but
so what happens now?
So what I was hoping would happen was that it would end up in the platform, but they didn't do that. They said, this is the people's platform. It's based on what we're hearing at the door. So that's what got into the platform. There weren't enough people in New Brunswick prioritizing electoral reform, which is kind of understandable in a way, because we've got a lot of crises, you know, the healthcare crisis and the homeless, homeless actually, and housing crisis,
climate crisis,
which I hate how quick everybody is to forget that. Like, just because things have been more expensive, it's like it goes to the bottom of the priority list. And I think it would really be helpful if we had a universal basic income, so that, you know, every time groceries got expensive, people wouldn't drop climate change as a priority. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. So
no, it's funny. We had experienced that a little bit last night at council, where, you know, we have a really exciting climate change program, and we also have a budget conversation in the same night. And we're like, well, where's the money for the climate piece? And they're like, well, it's not really on the priorities. And so you kind of end up in this like chicken and the egg situation where, and I mean, that was on, everyone can go watch St. John City Council last night for that discussion. But it is, to your point, like things got more expensive, climate kind of dropped off. And so despite those two things actually being kind of one and the same when it comes to how this world works, honestly. So back to where our timeline here, our story, the story we keep getting diverted from, but so it wasn't included on the platform. So does that mean that you'll sort of be waiting to hear if it can be implemented, maybe even still, or?
Yeah, well, there's a majority government rather. So if they did have a citizens' assembly, and the Citizens Assembly made recommendations while the Liberals had a majority, the Liberals would probably vote not to implement them. So it might still be worth having one just to see what they come up with, and then maybe it could be revisited at a later date. But I don't know if she wants to do it in this mandate. And I do want to have a talk with her, with Susan Holt. She is my representative because I live in Fredericton, South Silverwood. So I want to, as soon as I can, sit down and have a conversation with her about electoral reform, when she thinks she can get it done. How feasible does she think it is? Like, how many of her caucus support it, and how many are against it, and how many might be somewhere in the middle, you know?
And I think this leads to a place where I had to jump off there because little baby B is frustrated with so Beatrix is here with us. If she squawks in the mic, everybody, I'm so sorry, but she's pleasantly satiated by my incessant bouncing right now.
47-minute nap is.
Hey, we did good. Yeah. We did really good. But like, what's next? And I think it's like, okay, here's what I want to propose. If Susan Holt just, because there's things you do in government that you didn't run on. You do them because of the right thing. Like how they remove certain policies or go after certain things. It's like, sure, it might be in the platform, but platforms are campaign messages. Governance and good governance is a different matter altogether. There's no duplicity in that. It's just the fact that you can't nuance certain issues on a 30-day or 45-day campaign trail when you're having 2-minute conversations at the door, and most people would rather only spend 30 seconds with you. There's no way to have like an appropriate conversation about some of the issues that affect government. And I hope that goes without saying for a lot of people. I know it doesn't, but long story short, what gets you elected isn't always what's good for the country, or the province or the community. And in this case, I mean, nothing could do the Liberal brand more justice right now, nationally and provincially, than somebody who's just going to be like, we're going to do shit. And you know what? We're not going to necessarily follow all the rules. And so I'm going to, Susan's best thing that she could do make it a free vote. Take off the whip and be like, are we going to have electoral reform in New Brunswick or not? Or are we going to leave it as it is? All those in favor. And there's simple a question. It's not a hey, here's what we're going to do if we choose electoral reform. There'll be a process to talk about the best, like you said, a plebiscite of some sort, where they say, hey, no
I didn't
plebiscite.
say a plebiscite.
Sorry, when you were talking about PEI, that's what I meant. Like the idea that you put a few systems to the public to talk about and to a citizens' assembly to talk about. And maybe it's not a referendum, but it's like, are the leaders that have been elected going to weigh the balance and say, we believe that because of the diminishing impact of democracy or involvement with people in democracy, and you don't have to look very far. We're seeing parties get hijacked by special interests left, right, and center because there's so few like people involved with them. There's so little ground game in them. And so I think, like, my God, could you, like, if Susan were to do something like that, you demonstrate that the Liberal brand and the Liberal Party is willing to change, it's willing to transform, it's willing to try to do big things that no one else can do. At a time when so many people are just cynical about where things are going. So I would just say, like, as we're talking about should we, could she, might she, I mean, the big question she has in front of her right now is, will the Greens maintain official party status? Because they didn't get 15% of the vote and they didn't get 5 seats. So that was a carryover from Brian Gallant as an exception to the rule to let the Greens and the People's Alliance eventually have official party status. I mean, the rules currently say they shouldn't, but my God, would it ever be a thorn in their side if they pulled a stunt like that to say, no, we're going to abide by the rules as they're written rather than change them to what they should be. But anyway, that's my little rant about that.
I don't think she'll do that. You know, she said in her acceptance speech that she was looking forward to working with David Coons. So I think she would. I think she wants to have a more cooperative approach. And so I think she'll probably maintain the official party status. I want to say, you were talking about how things can be co-opted. And that's the problem with referendums and plebiscites. It's easy to co-opt them. And we really saw that in BC, where the No side ran a total fear-mongering campaign. And they had one video with goose-stepping Nazis in it. And, you know, they said all of the usual things. And they showed rioters and people voted no. So that's why Fair Vote Canada, we'd really like a citizens' assembly, but not one whose decisions have to be put to a referendum or a plebiscite. We'd really rather that it just gets voted on in the legislature.
Yeah, and that's their job ultimately, to make that call at this point, and to have the bold willingness to have that discussion as a legislature, as a governing body, because I think governance improvement should be the priority in some way, shape, or form of every level of government. We've had like dozens of hours of governance training to help us be better at our council jobs, for instance. Like that to me is so important, because we are not dealing in a party system that can become quite toxic. And we've heard wild and crazy stories about even such things as far as like fistfights at the legislature. So
Kevin Arsenault and Glenn Savoy had to go to counseling.
Really? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. So
no, it wasn't a fist fight, but it was a physical altercation that I think it was the speaker who ordered it it was a hallway incident, or it was like a party sort of thing. Like both parties agreed, like, all right, we got to send our boys in for a timeout. Like it was, we've heard some serious stories, people getting called traitors in the ledge, like just stuff that average people would be like, what are you guys doing? And anybody who chimes into question period right now in Parliament in Ottawa, anybody who sees that's like, what are these clowns doing? No matter which party they think should be in power, right? Like,
yeah, it's bad. And you wouldn't think people would want to maintain a work environment like that. You would think they'd want to improve it. And if the way to improve it is to change to a system that encourages cooperation,
Yeah,
I think they'd want to do that.
absolutely.
Yeah. The
And
Lord
when you
of
have
the Flies.
majority, there's stories too we've heard, that former Premier Higgs truly believes that the only position of power that even exists is the office of the Premier, that everything else just, you're just futilely fighting unless the Premier wants your, opinion heard, then you can do what he did, which is just top down hierarchical approach. And ultimately we've seen empires fall with that. And I think that it is something that future visionaries, hopefully current visionaries like Premier Holt, will see as a way to not ever endure that in New Brunswick ever again, or operate like that herself.
Yeah, and
So
that is a perversion of our democracy. That's not how the system is supposed to work. Each representative is supposed to be representing their constituents, and they can only do that if they have the freedom to vote the way their constituents want them to vote. And so, when you have this top-down thing, the PMO's office, that didn't used to exist. Somebody had to make that. And then they've invested all this power into people who weren't even elected.
Yeah, Gerald Butch was of course. But who? You're right. Who was it that invented the PMO's office? I think it goes back quite a ways. I don't know if it goes back to Jean Chrétien, Brian Mulrooney, but something tells me somewhere along those two cats we had the invention of it, and you have it in New Brunswick. You have the office of the Premier, and are they the same? No, but it's similar enough where you have a centralization destination for all those decisions and for massaging messages. And we've talked about it on this pod before, but and I know we're coming up on the hour, so we'll start to wrap things up. But this idea that in other even first past the post systems. So even when you think of first past the post, which that's what we have right now as it is, they have things like a party whipped vote. A party whip, which is a title given to a person in cabinet. Usually this person, if they're in the governing party, is in cabinet. If they're in the official opposition or whatever, they have a pretty senior position. And their job, like for example, in the United Kingdom, is to try to give the leader of the party a sense at where the chips will fall when the vote comes, because those parties, like in the UK, do not have assumed whips. There is no practice in the UK where the Premier stands up and says, by the way, this is a whip vote, and if y'all don't vote my way from my party, y'all are going to go. I'm kicking you out, right? That we do that here by assumption. Nobody else does it.
I think Dominic Carty pointed that out, that New Brunswick doesn't have to actually operate like that.
That's right. It was Dominic Carty, surprisingly enough.
Yeah, he makes some good points. He's a smart guy. And then also, I think we've got some other things like the leader of the party has to sign the nomination papers. I think that might be our only uniquely Canadian thing that gives the leader way too much power. Once they get elected, the MLAs or whatever they are, they step really carefully. They don't want to leader because then he might not sign their nomination papers next time. So it's just, we end up in Canada with a system where even compared to other first past the post systems, there's so much power invested in the leader, whether it be the Premier or the PM, the party leader. Yeah, so that's a problem too.
That's a good point.
Well, thank you so much, Vivian, for this super insightful discussion.
Yeah, we went the whole hour.
Yeah, we did. And, the baby didn't even freak out, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So, no, I appreciate your insight, because I think this is a heavy, sort of weedy topic, but ultimately it's one that would result in a hugely different landscape politically if we were willing to undertake it. So I appreciate your insight.
We will be obviously reaching out if there's any sort of movement on this file in the future.
Okay, thanks, Brent and Joanna. Great to talk to you.
You too.
You're watching Rogers TV. This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Welcome, everyone, to Live at the Light Spot. We've done another show for you. Hopefully you're going to enjoy it. I'd like to start out with a couple of my own songs. All these songs are songs that I have written, that I'm doing, and my special guest will be doing her own songs. So thank you, Rogers, for allowing us to showcase our gospel music. My first song is called Church Without Walls, which is the kind of church that Jesus had. Jesus